I never thought the first photo of my son would come from a tabloid. Their headline was glaring: "The Hohenzollern Empire welcomes its new heir. Mother flies to the US with new lover to pick up the child." In the photo, Eleonora wore sunglasses and had a blank expression, standing beside the attentive Felix von Baden. That child, I'd traded my marriage and dignity for him, was in her arms, like a trophy that had nothing to do with me. In that moment, all my forbearance and compromise turned into a towering rage. I opened social media and typed that headline: "I am not a genetic tool, I am merely a son-in-law of their Hohenzollerns." Autumn in Paris, plain leaves carpeted the ground. Eleonora Hohenzollern stepped on the fallen leaves, her pace quick and steady, precise, like the merger and acquisition meeting she was about to chair. The air smelled of dry leaves and old books, a kind of arrogant tranquility peculiar to academic sanctuaries. A figure blocked her path. He wore a faded denim jacket, the shoulder seams even a little tight, clashing sharply with the elite aura around him. But the light in his eyes was scorching, as if it would set the autumn day ablaze. "Ms. Hohenzollern," his voice carried a faint, imperceptible Eastern European accent, "my name is Sebastian Kovacs. Please take a look at this." He handed over a stack of papers, their edges crumpled by the sweat of his palms. On the top page, in bold font, were the words, "Boundless, a clothing revolution breaking all boundaries." Eleonora's fingertips brushed the paper. Her nails were perfectly trimmed, coated in expensive, skin-toned nail polish. The cold touch contrasted with the roughness of the paper. She should have walked away. Family affairs were like invisible reins tightening around her time. But in that moment, the light in his eyes, that reckless sincerity and longing, was like a thin needle, piercing through her habitual cold exterior unexpectedly. She took the papers. Even from a plain leaf that had fallen on his shoulder, she caught a whiff of sunlight and freedom, a thing sorely lacking in her life. Later, in that final investment agreement with harsh terms, he had secretly tucked that plain leaf, carefully pressed into a bookmark. Its dark green veins were edged with the golden yellow of autumn. When Eleonora opened the folder, the leaf fluttered down lightly. She glanced at it, then casually tossed it into the bottom drawer of her desk. The drawer closed with a soft, resolute click. The wedding at the Hohenzollern Manor in Vienna was as grand as a national celebration. Beneath the Baroque dome, crystal chandeliers shattered light into countless dazzling specks. The air was filled with the faint acidity of bubbles from precious champagne, the almost cloying fragrance of thousands of white roses, and an indescribable coldness belonging to ancient wealth and power. Sebastian stood in front of the mirror, letting the tailor make final adjustments. The suit was a handcrafted masterpiece by an Italian master designated by Eleonora. Every inch of fabric was prohibitively expensive. The platinum lapel pin shaped like the Hohenzollern family crest pressed coldly against his Adam's apple. He looked at his reflection, unfamiliar, refined, like a meticulously packaged commodity. He thought of the wall covered in awards in his Budapest home, and the mixed pride and worry in his parents' eyes. The wedding march played solemnly. He walked toward Eleonora, who stood at the end of the light. She was breathtakingly beautiful. Her ivory white wedding dress trailed the ground, and her face beneath the veil was exquisite yet distant. He reached out, his fingertips touching hers through her white velvet gloves. No response, only cold smoothness. When exchanging rings, the large diamond's facets refracted a hard, cold light. He took a sip of the champagne handed to him. The expensive liquid slid down his throat, tasting like flavorless salt water. He was introduced to countless dignitaries. Their handshakes were firm, their smiles standard, but their eyes were like scanners. Whispers buzzed like never-ending mosquitoes in the background. "Kovacs. Never heard that surname. From Hungary. Lucky man." He found the backstage, wanting to loosen the lapel pin that pricked his throat. His hand had just touched the doorknob when the door opened from the inside. Eleonora stood there, tilting her head slightly as Felix von Baden, the son of the German real estate tycoon, adjusted a strand of hair by her ear. Their posture was intimate and familiar. When Felix saw him, the corner of his mouth curled into an almost imperceptible, contemptuous arc. Eleanora turned around, and when she saw him, there was no fluster in her eyes, only her usual calm, and even a hint of irritation at being disturbed. "Something wrong?" she asked, her voice cold and smooth. He shook his head, his throat tight. Eleanora didn't look at him again, walking out straight away with Felix. Her dress brushed his instep, the fabric as cold as water. Their wedding night. The bridal chamber was vast and empty, luxurious yet cold. Eleanora had changed out of her wedding dress, wearing a silk nightgown, and sat at the vanity removing her makeup slowly. When she finished, she turned around, picked up a document, and handed it to him. "Take a look. Sign it if there's no problem." Her tone was flat, no ripple in it. The title of the document was like a poisoned ice pick piercing his eyes: Supplementary Agreement on Offspring Breeding Program. The terms were cold and detailed: genetic screening to ensure male gender, surrogacy, the child belonged to the Hohenzollerns, he waived most parental rights. "Why?" His voice was dry. "We are spouses." "Spouses," she repeated softly, as if savoring a strange and ridiculous word. "What the Hohenzollerns need is a qualified heir, a continuation of pure, excellent blood, not the fruit of love." She leaned forward slightly, the scent of expensive perfume wafting over, with an undercurrent of distant, cold fragrance. "This is just a transaction. I gave you the money to save Boundless, and you provided high-quality, easily controllable genes. Don't forget Clause 7 of the agreement's appendix. That clause stipulated he must cooperate with the family's inheritance plan. If the child is just a bargaining chip," he clenched his fists, his knuckles white, "then what's the difference between me and a slave sold into bondage?" Finally, there was a flicker in her eyes, irritation. "Watch your words, Mr. Kovacs. This is the optimal solution. Do you want a child with Hohenzollern blood to grow up in a working-class family in Budapest, squeezing onto buses and counting supermarket discounts to get by?" The words, "working-class family in Budapest," were spoken in a soft yet brutally cruel tone. He stood up abruptly, but she remained seated, looking up at him, no fear in her eyes, only condescending scrutiny. In the end, the churning emotions in his eyes died out, leaving only cold, dead ashes. He picked up the pen. The signature he scrawled was almost unrecognizable. She took the agreement and checked the signature. "Good. Isabella will send you the specific schedule tomorrow. Rest early." She walked to the huge double bed, lying down on the other side, her back to him. The distance between them was as wide as the Danube. The private medical center in Monaco was eerily quiet. The air smelled of a strange mix of disinfectant and expensive perfume. The corridor floors were polished to a mirror finish, and the only sound was the faint, countdown-like ticking of medical equipment. Sebastian followed Eleanora. She wore a sharply tailored suit, her steps determined. In the consultation room, the doctor smiled as he explained the process, displaying cold genetic data on the screen. Eleanora listened attentively. Sebastian's gaze, however, was fixed on an examination room nearby. A young woman in a hospital gown lay there, her eyes empty, her hand rested unconsciously on her abdomen, her knuckles white, her fingertips rough with calluses. Therefore, in the initial screening, female embryos will not be used as they do not meet the agreement's requirements. The doctor's voice was steady. Sebastian spun around abruptly. "Why not? Are they unhealthy?" The doctor paused, glancing at Eleanora. Eleanora didn't even look at him. "The agreement is clear, Sebastian. It has to be a boy. But these are our children. What's wrong with a girl?" Sebastian. She cut him off, her eyes icy cold and impatient. "Have you forgotten how bad Boundless' latest quarterly report was? Forgot who invested that 50 million? Don't forget your place. In this transaction, you have no right to say no." The unspoken word, divestment, was like invisible shackles locking him in place. His Adam's apple bobbed, all words stuck in his throat, dissolving into a metallic-tasting silence. The first embryo transfer failed. Eleanora immediately ordered arrangements to be made in Japan for another attempt. Sebastian sat in his hotel room, looking out at the blue Mediterranean and toy-like yachts, yet feeling no warmth at all. In the corridor, he ran into Clara, the old housekeeper. "Mr. Kovacs, are you all right?" she asked softly. He smiled bitterly and shook his head. Clara sighed. "Sir, did you really think Madam loves you? She only needs a genetic donor, someone smart enough, healthy enough, with a simple background that's easy to control. A high-quality gene, to continue the Hohenzollern bloodline. That's her mission." These words were like the final boulder, crushing the last of his illusions about that fleeting spark of affection in the Parisian autumn. His phone rang. It was Marcus, the co-founder of Boundless. "Sebastian. I absolutely disagree with the location for the Zurich flagship store. The rent is too high. Cash flow can't keep up. Wake up. Have you been dazzled by the Hohenzollerns?" "Marcus, Save it. If you insist, I'm quitting. Boundless wasn't supposed to be your stepping stone." The call ended with a sharp click. Sebastian leaned against the cold wall, sliding down to the floor slowly. He felt cold, bone-deep cold. Only 2 months after signing the marriage certificate, Eleonora had already proposed divorce twice. Once because he used the wrong cutlery, once because he exploited the Hohenzollern name. Each time, George Hohenzollern stepped in to mediate. This time, in the study, George sat behind a huge mahogany desk, cigar smoke blurring his sharp eyes. "Sebastian, Eleonora has a bit of a temper. You're a man, you need to be more forgiving. Is Boundless in trouble?" He pulled out a document. "Here's 10 million euros. Borrow it first to keep things afloat." Sebastian signed it. Only later did his lawyer point out the harsh hidden clauses in the agreement. If not repaid on time, Boundless shares would be used as collateral. It wasn't aid, it was another chain. Meanwhile, the entrepreneurial insights he shared on social media unexpectedly went viral, and his follower count soared. One late night, he posted a status, "Working overtime late at night. Grateful for my wife's support and company." Heart, in the corner of the attached photo was the fountain pen Eleonora had given him, captured accidentally. The next morning, Eleonora held her phone, shoving the screen almost into his face, her expression ugly, cold rage burning in her eyes. "Delete it. Now. Sebastian Kovacs, who gave you permission to exploit the Hohenzollern name for publicity? What do you think you are? Put away that speculative mindset you picked up climbing out of the gutter." Every word felt like a slap. He took the phone silently and deleted the post. The follower count on the screen kept rising, a cruel mockery. January 2024. That long overdue wedding of the century was more like a grand performance. Sebastian played the role of the happy groom. Backstage, he saw Felix von Baden again, planting a natural kiss on Eleonora's forehead, his tone intimate, tired. "I'll take you to relax after this." Eleonora didn't refuse, she even smiled faintly, a smile more genuine than any she'd given him. Sebastian's heart sank into a cold, dead silence. Less than 2 months after the wedding, Eleonora filed for divorce unilaterally. Through her lawyer, Isabella Rossi, she sent cold documents demanding he waive all rights to the child. He tried to contact her, but was stopped outside the manor. Clara slipped him a note, with just one word, "comply." The child was born in the US. He found out from a tabloid. In the photo, Eleonora wore sunglasses, her expression indifferent, with Felix standing beside her. A nurse held the tiny swaddled baby. His child. He had no right to know first, no right to take a single look. All his forbearance, compromise, and dignity collapsed in an instant. August 15, 2024. Boundless headquarters in Zurich. The sky outside was overcast. The office was in chaos. Sebastian sat in front of his computer, the screen light illuminating his red-rimmed eyes and stubble. He typed the headline, "I am not a genetic tool, I am merely a son-in-law of the Hohenzollerns." Words poured out: the Parisian autumn, the Vienna wedding, the Monaco agreement, the surrogate mother's hand, the loan trap, the denied visits, the absurdity of seeing his child in a newspaper. Every word cut like a knife. He pressed send. Outside, lightning split the sky. Eleanora's counterattack was swift as lightning. Isabella Rossi held a press conference, displaying the loan agreement and accusing him of defaulting on debts and exploiting the Hohenzollerns. Media outlets received tips, insinuating doubts about his sexual orientation and hinting at a same-sex marriage scam. Labels like gold-digging son-in-law, calculating trophy husband were plastered on him. Public opinion reversed. Followers plummeted. Boundless faced boycotts and terminated partnerships. Sebastian sat in his paralyzed office, watching the surge of malice. The world had become unrecognizable, hideous. Just as the cold tide was about to swallow him whole, a tiny lifeboat appeared. Marcus came back, silently taking over Boundless and providing financial reports to prove his innocence. An anonymous audio recording reached his lawyer, Eleanora's cold voice ordering, "Abandon all female embryos, only a male heir." The courtroom fell deathly silent. Sebastian stood up, pulling out a carefully laminated document. "Your Honor, this is the DNA paternity test report between myself and the child." His voice was hoarse but firm. In black and white, biological father and son, irrefutable. He held the report out toward Eleanora. "Eleanora Hohenzollern, do you hear me? This makes me his father, not a product on your shelf. Not a genetic tool you can buy, use, and discard." Eleanora's eyelashes trembled violently, but she quickly regained her composure, even curling her lips into a cold smile. "An agreement is an agreement. Your purpose has been served. Visitation rights. The Hohenzollern heir doesn't need an overly emotional father who can't even take care of himself to cause trouble." Overly emotional. Sebastian's laugh was filled with sorrow. "I just want to see my child, to hear him call me daddy. Is that being overly emotional? In your eyes, is everything that can't be measured by money or agreements a mistake?" At that moment, Sebastian's lawyer pulled out a tablet. "Your Honor, although my client has been forcibly separated from his child, the bond between father and son has never been broken. These are bedtime story videos, Mr. Sebastian Kovacs recorded every day for the past 3 months, even though he knew full well these videos would never reach the child. Clips of the videos began to play on the screen. Sebastian faced the camera, dark circles of exhaustion under his eyes, but forcing a smile as he told ancient fairy tales in soft Hungarian. The background was sometimes his office, sometimes a dim hotel room. In the last video, he sang a melancholy Hungarian lullaby. By the end, his voice cracked, and he raised his hand to cover his eyes, the camera shaking and blurring. The courtroom fell unusually quiet. Suddenly, an assistant hurried in, whispering something in Isabella's ear. Isabella's face paled sharply, and she glanced at Eleanora in shock. Eleanora frowned, taking the phone. She looked at it once, and her face turned ashen. The hard ice shell around her finally shattered, revealing panic and vulnerability. Her hands began to shake uncontrollably. George Hohenzollern was critically ill. Isabella, who had remained calm until now, looked at Eleanora's distracted state, then at Sebastian across the room, his eyes red, fighting only for the most basic rights of a father. She took a deep breath, as if making a painful decision, and stood up slowly. "Your Honor," her voice trembled slightly but was clear, I need to correct some of my previous statements. Regarding that loan agreement, its terms were indeed overly harsh and clearly trap-like. It was deliberately designed under the explicit instructions of my client and her father, with the purpose of completely controlling Mr. Kovacs and his company. The courtroom erupted in an uproar. Eleanora stared at her in shock, betrayal blazing in her eyes. Isabella avoided her gaze, continuing. Furthermore, their campaign to guide public opinion in questioning Mr. Kovacs' sexual orientation was also ordered by Ms. Hohenzollern. The goal was to completely stigmatize him in the public eye and weaken the legitimacy of his fight for custody. I chose to cooperate out of professional ambition. I am deeply ashamed. I apply to resign as legal counsel and am willing to bear all consequences. The truth exploded like a bomb. Felix von Baden's face darkened, and he unconsciously shifted away. Eleonora stood there, isolated and helpless, her father critically ill, her lawyer defecting, her schemes exposed. Under the weight of these blows, she swayed unsteadily. For the first time, panic, pain, and helpless confusion clearly showed in her always cold grey-blue eyes. Sebastian looked at her. There was no triumph in his heart, only a heavy, sorrowful weariness. In this war, there were no winners. The final verdict: Eleonora retained primary custody of the child. Sebastian was granted visitation rights every weekend. The court severely condemned the use of economic advantage to set up trap-like contract terms. No cheers, no celebration. Sebastian walked out of the courtroom silently. London's cold, misty rain hit his face. Marcus waited at the door, handing him an umbrella wordlessly. Going to the hospital. He meant George. Sebastian was silent for a moment, then shook his head. Going now would just feel like a performance. Let's go. Back to Vienna. George Hohenzollern didn't survive that winter. On the hospital bed, the old man had grown gaunt and fragile. Sebastian went to see him anyway, bringing a bottle of Hungarian fruit wine, George's favorite in his younger days. George could barely speak, his cloudy eyes gazing out at the flowing Danube. Sorry. The old man forced out the words with great difficulty. Thank you too. Eleonora. His gaze drifted into the distance. She's just been pushed too hard by the family. Don't let her walk my path. His hand grew cold in Sebastian's. The bottle of fruit wine still sat on the nightstand, its warmth fading away. Sebastian withdrew from Boundless, using the remaining funds to repay debts and settle his employees. In the end, he founded a small studio, specializing in designing and producing comfortable, affordable clothing for impoverished patients confined to beds long-term. He named the studio Lena, after his late younger sister. It was his return to his original aspiration, and a silent tribute. Eleonora broke up with Felix von Baden. She moved back to the Hohenzollern manor in Vienna alone with the child, reorganizing the group with even more ruthless efficiency than her father and securing her position as CEO. Only, on her desk, there were still fresh, blooming red roses replaced daily, but she never touched them, afraid of being pricked. Occasionally, on weekends, she would stand by the floor-to-ceiling window in the manor's master bedroom, looking down. Sebastian would arrive promptly, driving an ordinary car, bringing homemade Hungarian pastries or small toys. One sunny spring weekend, he was in the garden, helping the child learn to walk, patiently holding out his arms. The child giggled, rushing into his embrace. Sebastian lifted him up high, his smile so bright it hurt the eyes. Eleonora stood behind the window, watching silently. The child's unreserved dependence, the pure, fierce paternal love in Sebastian's eyes, these were things she had never given, and seemingly never received. A sharp, unfamiliar pain seized her heart unexpectedly. That afternoon, it began to rain. The visitation time ended, the child, tired out from playing, fell asleep. Sebastian handed him to the nanny, preparing to leave. As he reached the door, he found Eleonora standing there, as if she'd been waiting for a while. Rain tapped against the eaves. Stay for dinner, she said suddenly, her voice dry, her gaze not meeting his. Sebastian froze. At the dinner table, the atmosphere was still silent. They sat at opposite ends of the long oak table. But on the table, instead of French fine dining, there was a plate of steaming, fragrant Hungarian goulash, served with a small dish of handmade noodles. It was the taste of his hometown. Sebastian looked up at Eleonora. She was staring down, cutting her food slowly and gracefully, the shadow of her eyelashes hiding her eyes. She said nothing, offered no explanation. He picked up his knife and fork in silence. The dining room was quiet, save for the crackle of firewood in the fireplace and the steady patter of rain outside. From the distant nursery, the faint murmur of the child's sleep talk drifted over. They didn't speak, didn't meet each other's eyes. But something flowed quietly in this silent space, filled with the warmth of food. Regret, weariness, mourning for a past that could never be undone, and perhaps, a tiny, almost imperceptible shared recognition of their pain. Between them, the Danube had raged and frozen for so long. At last, the water seemed less biting, its current slowing slightly. It still lay there, wide and deep, uncrossable. But at the very least, they had stopped trying to hurl sharp stones across to the other side. Sometimes, they could stand apart this eternal current, and silently catch a glimpse of each other's figures, and the small world they had created together, yet could never share. Sebastian finished the last bite of beef and put down his knife and fork. "Thank you. It was delicious," he said softly. Eleonora didn't respond, only her fingertips trembled slightly. He stood up, said goodbye, and didn't look back. Eleonora sat alone in the empty dining room for a long time. Until the fire in the fireplace dimmed, and the rain gradually stopped. Outside, the Danube flowed quietly under the moonlight that emerged after the rain, silently witnessing everything. It had seen empires rise and fall, countless meetings and partings. Now, it witnessed this marriage, torn apart by greed, finally finding a tiny, yet real, cold reconciliation in their shared identity as parents.